What I want to talk to you about is what happened on the 22nd of February 2018. I was with my deputy chairman of Intact Denmark in a meeting with the American embassy to Denmark. And at the very beginning of that meeting, the political officers from the embassy said, "What would it take for you?" I'm sorry, I completely entered into that sentence wrong. What would it take to make you withdraw your citizens' initiative? And what led up to that situation where the American government tried to interfere in the Danish democratic process is what I want to tell you about. So, Intact Denmark was founded in 2013. I was the primary founder with a number of good people, Muslims, Jews, some circumcised, some not circumcised. We now hold a seat in the Danish National Council for Human Rights, and we have been approved to report to the UN Committee on the rights of the child, and we have done that. And I'm here today because ARC has been so kind to help me financially. When we founded Intact Denmark in 2013, we had the support of approximately 62% of the population in order to introduce an 18-year age limit for non-therapeutic genital cutting. The support now is 89.6%. So I think we've achieved something over the years. At that time, we didn't have the support of the medical organizations in Denmark. Now, all medical organizations in Denmark support the abolishment of non-therapeutic genital cutting of children. Not all of them actively recommend an age limit. Most of them say that it's not within their purview to argue whether there should be an age limit or not. But the consensus is from the medical organizations that non-therapeutic cutting of children is unethical, it is harmful, and it's potentially dangerous. So we're working to introduce a sex-neutral 18-year age limit. We want the same type of sanctions as any other bodily harm, whether it's to the chin or the inner thigh or the prepuce. We, of course, want massive prevention efforts because in Europe, as opposed to the US, circumcision rates are rising because it's a demographic challenge within minority communities in Europe, and these are growing. And then we want to help the affected families, not just only the individuals who are cut, but the entire families, also the parents who regret or are challenged on what they've done. The legislative status in Denmark today is that bodily harm is illegal, and it's normally sanctioned with 3 to 5 years of imprisonment. We've had FGM cases. FGM has can lead to up to 6 years of imprisonment. We've also had MGM cases prosecuted, but only when it's unauthorized personnel who have performed them. We don't have any legislative, there's no line anywhere in any law saying that circumcisions should only be prosecuted when they're performed by unauthorized personnel. It's sort of an informal precedence that has occurred within the legal system. And it's the understanding in the entire system that any case that involves authorized personnel, medical doctors, or religiously authorized personnel, such as rabbis, should not be prosecuted. And also recently, actually due to the work of, amongst others, Intact Denmark, we have had the introduction of what is probably the strongest set of rules surrounding non-therapeutic male circumcision anywhere in the world. But the problem with these rules, as strong as they are, is that they introduce a gray zone, a gray area, where circumcision, non-therapeutic circumcision of males becomes legally accepted, even if it's not formally legal. So we have this odd gray area that we're navigating. As I told you, there's the support from the public and the medical organizations. And that led to our Citizens Initiative, which was published on February 1st, 2022, and immediately inspired the Icelandic initiative 2 days later. The Icelandic initiative, of course, was met with very prominent opposition and died fairly quickly, whereas it took the American and the Danish government 3 years to kill our initiative, and only because they then introduced stronger rules on the issue. Of course, it should be questioned whether rules regarding proper mutilation is ethical. Of course, in my opinion, it's not. So why does the American government take an interest in healthy boy penises? The gentleman you see here with me in the picture, I'm wearing a penis costume, is Rufus Gifford. At the time that this picture was taken, he was the US ambassador to Denmark under the Obama administration. He's not afraid of penises, luckily. I had a chance to talk to him on several occasions on this issue, and he confirmed to me that the American government was revisiting this issue on a regular basis every few months, in deliberations with the Danish government. I asked him, what does that mean? Does that mean that the US will sanction Denmark if Denmark passes legislation on non-therapeutic circumcision? And he said, yes, that is what it means. I asked him, what are these sanctions? And he sort of slid off the issue, and I asked, does this mean that there will be economical and foreign policy sanctions if Denmark passes legislation on this issue? And he concurred without saying anything. And that very much matches the opposition that we've met from politicians. The political counter-arguments when we have asked for legislation on these issues have been considerations for the religious and ethnic and cultural minorities, especially the Jewish minority in Denmark, which is interesting because the Jewish minority performs approximately 5 ritual circumcisions a year. So it's a very odd situation. Our estimate is that 3,500 non-therapeutic circumcisions of male minors are performed in Denmark each year. The official estimate from the authorities is about 2,000 circumcisions. So who are performing these? That would, generally speaking, be Muslim and Christian minorities from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. So, minority concerns, care for the minority communities in Denmark, I think that's a very valid concern, not to disenfranchise our minority communities. The risk of sanctions from the US, however, I do not think that's a valid concern. Money should not take precedence over ethics and children's rights. And then there's the risk of terrorism. One of the first things that happened after we proposed the Citizens Initiative was that I was invited on TV. I know in intactivism that's not something that happens all the time, but it is in Denmark. We're used to being headlines, we're used to being news. In 2018, we had more than 3,500 articles and TV appearances and radio appearances, and I don't know, we stopped counting at some point. So the fact that I had to go on TV to talk about this issue was not a big thing. The fact that they started asking me, so how many Danes are supposed to die for your Citizens' Initiative? How many Danish soldiers do you want to see killed for your Citizens' Initiative? How many children should be bombed in the metro for your Citizens' Initiative? That was new. I did not expect that. But that's because of the risk of terrorism. Of course, Denmark was the place that the Mohammed crisis occurred, also called the cartoon crisis. That led to a lot of loss of lives in Europe and in the Middle East. And in several reports, we haven't seen it, but we've seen them referenced. In several reports from Danish National Intelligence Services, it's estimated that introducing an 18-year age limit for circumcision, non-therapeutic circumcision in Denmark, would lead to a terrorism threat level that matches or supersedes that of the Mohammed crisis. So that would lead to the highest terrorism level, threat level that we have seen in Danish national history. That was intense, I have to say. What I did when I was confronted with these questions, during an interview which was supposed to be only a few minutes about how citizens' initiatives function, because citizens' initiatives were a completely new thing in Denmark. So what I did was I thought, well, it's 1 o'clock. If they're going to use the footage from the interview with me, they'll have to finish by either 4 or 5. That's their deadline to make the evening news. So I'll just have to answer the same thing until it's 4 or 5 o'clock. So they kept asking me, how many people are going to die for you? And I answered, so Intact Denmark Citizens' Initiative is an attempt to protect children from bodily harm. How many Danes are going to die for you? Intact Denmark Citizens' Initiative. That was a long few hours. They stopped after an hour and a half. Yeah. But the international response wasn't, it didn't just stop with the media attention. There was a lot of international response. One was from the embassy, I'm getting back to that, but also from Israel. Here you see the current Danish Prime Minister. She wasn't the Prime Minister at the time, but it has been an ongoing process. And here she is in debates with Benjamin Netanyahu, who was, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel. He has tweeted and given interviews about how grateful he is that the Danish Prime Minister has promised that Denmark will never legislate on the issue of circumcision, regardless of the fact that almost 90% of Danes want an age limit. But of course it didn't end there. There was the American embassy. There were delegations from America to Denmark. There were delegations from American congressmen to the embassy of Denmark in Washington. All of this we've pieced together over the years. We've heard something from MPs in informal conversations. We don't have the same federal laws on rights to information as you have in the US, but we do have access to some information on what's going on in the parliament, and so does journalists. So by combining all the information we have been able to get from the parliament, we know that at least 18 US Congress members have approached the Danish embassy. We know that the American government regularly approaches the Danish embassy on this issue. We know that several Jewish lobby organizations have come forward to the Danish media to explain. These are Danish as well as American and Israeli Jewish organizations have come forward to explain to the Danish media that they have tried to influence this process. And then there was, of course, the call from the American embassy to Intact Denmark to make us withdraw our citizens' initiative. So when they asked us, what would it take to make you withdraw your citizens' initiative? We should, of course, have answered, you know, what's on the table? What are you willing to give? Just to know what they were proposing. But that was not quite the mood we were in. So what we said was, it's very easy. The citizens' initiative becomes null and void the minute that there is an 18-year age limit. Pass a legislation tomorrow, our citizens' initiative goes away. Secondly, if you had read the legislation regarding citizens' initiatives and they interrupted us and said, oh, we've read it. Of course, we read Danish all the time. We've read this legislation. And we said, listen, if you had read it, you would know that even though we have proposed the citizens' initiative, we cannot withdraw it. We can't change a comma. We can't change a sentence. We can't withdraw it. The minute it's out there, the minute it's publicized, it's out of our hands. It's in the hands of the public. It's a democratic process. So we couldn't withdraw it even if we wanted to. It has to run its course. And thirdly, and I'm going to put this as diplomatically as I can because I'm on camera here. Thank you very much. We do not need your interference in Danish democratic processes. I think I was a little bit more tense at the time. Then we asked them, why do you interfere in Danish national politics? What on earth are you doing? And they said, we've been asked to engage in this process from the Jewish community. Whether that was the Danish Jewish community or international Jewish communities, we don't know. They didn't specify. And then we asked, but why? I mean, one thing is that the Jewish communities ask you to interfere, but why are you doing it? And one of the political officers went into an explanation that, of course, opposing circumcision is anti-Semitic. It so happens that my lovely deputy chair in Intact Denmark, Michael Achter, is also a very he's a very diplomatic man when he chooses to be, and he was. So he very kindly turned to her and said, as an involuntarily circumcised Jewish man, I disagree with that. And then she abandoned the issue of anti-Semitism and threw herself into arguing that, of course, intact males are unhygienic and generally disgusting. And she elicited her companion's opinion on that. And he said, well, that's not entirely how I feel about my foreskin, personally. So she abandoned that issue. And it was a very long conversation, and I'm not sure we'll be invited to any 4th of July celebrations at the embassy anytime soon. In fact, that was the second meeting we've ever been invited to at the embassy, and I don't think there'll be a third. But of course, if we are invited, we'll definitely take the invitation. Now, there has been a lot of very important results from our citizens' initiative. One was that the rules regarding circumcisions have been severely strengthened. There has to be life-saving equipment available on every clinic that performs circumcision. That was not the rule before, that is the rule now. Of course, how you can even well, I don't have to explain that to you. But another very, very important result of the process was that the Parliamentary Legal Office, the Justice Department, and the Danish Human Rights Institute all agreed that it is possible to legislate to introduce an age limit on circumcision without being in conflict with religious rights, as long as the arguments for that legislation are based in the rights of the child. That's, of course, what we've said all along. That's the reason why we're proposing this. But this means that they have argued, all of them, that the legal basis is present. We're not in conflict with any conventions, the European Human Rights Conventions, for instance, and we're not in conflict with the Danish Constitution. We can pass legislation. It's only a question of political courage. As I mentioned before, we have all the sources available. All of this is documented. The political process is documented. I can provide that documentation, but there's a lot of it. And the next step now in the legislative process is that the Parliament is now trying to slip in, to make non-therapeutic circumcisions legal in certain contexts by slipping it into a general reform on the national healthcare. But I'll be talking to the National Health Committee about this on September 13th. And I've been struggling to figure out whether that's my 10th or 12th appearance in a parliamentary committee in Denmark, but it's somewhere along there, so we're on a first-name basis with the parliament members. And then, of course, we have an upcoming election in Denmark. So we're moving mandates. We've done that before, and we're definitely trying to move mandates this year. Once we have a new situation in the parliament, we will reintroduce the issue of legislation. So, I think we can all agree, don't cut healthy children, and don't mess with intact Denmark politically. Now, if you're interested in the process, please follow us on social media. We should be very, very easy to find. And if there's time, please ask any question. 5 minutes. Okay.
You mentioned that you have the support of over 80% of the Danish public. And as a political science professor, I know that Denmark is probably second only to Switzerland in Europe for the country to have the most number of referendums. Is there any chance of maybe bypassing Parliament and going straight to a referendum?
We actually don't have a referendum system in that way in Denmark, so that's not a possibility. But what can happen, at the moment we have 13 parties in Parliament. There's a little bit of it's sometimes strategically challenging, but there will probably be a landslide election sometime within the next year. We don't have elections on a fixed date in Denmark, and that landslide election could allow us to move forward with legislation sometime within the next year or so. If it doesn't become a landslide election, we might be locked politically for another 4 years.
Anybody else? Let me check on the screen. Thank you so much for your work in Denmark.
Thank you.
Question over there. Okay, okay. Let me go there and I'll be back with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lena. Oh my gosh. my hero, seriously. Besides Denmark and Iceland, do you know the other countries that are attempting to pass legislation and the U.S. is stopping them?
Well, we know there's been a process in Finland, but that wasn't very strongly strategically, politically founded, so nothing much happened there. There has been movement in Norway, but of course the Norwegian government put their foot down and prevented that. So Norwegian and German legislation is very similar now in that it actively allows non-therapeutic circumcisions. But there is movement in all European countries, especially the northern European countries. For instance, in Denmark, we've had legislation for 25 years. You're not allowed to verbally abuse your children. You're not allowed to smack them. You're not allowed to spank them. Why on earth would you be allowed to cut parts of them? It just makes sense to the public. And when it makes sense to the public, politicians might be a little bit slow, but eventually they'll catch up.
I was wondering, does the general public in Denmark understand that the U.S. is trying to meddle in their democracy, and is that something that's up in front in the upcoming elections? Is that an issue?
It's not an issue in the up-and-coming elections right now, but we're definitely planning to make it that. And we've reached a point where at the last national election, I got a call from a member of the leadership of one of the parties asking me to stop pounding on that party regarding circumcision. And I said, sure, that's easy. We can agree on that immediately. You just go out and declare yourselves in favor of an 18-year age limit. We back off and concentrate on someone else. It's that easy. And he said, well, yeah, not really. Okay, I said, well, that's your issue. You won't get elected. So he called me a week before the election and said, okay, now I've changed my mind. Now I would like to come out publicly in favor of an age limit. And I said, sorry, you're too late. We simply don't have the slots on our social media, so you'll have to wait to get elected until next time. And he wasn't elected. Now he's in favor of an 18-year age limit. Last one.
Hey, thank you for your work. Is the age limit law as is proposed by your initiative criminally enforced, or is it civilly enforced?
We don't have that distinction in Danish law that you have in the US, but it would be in the penal code in the Danish system if it's the type of legislation that we proposed. But what we proposed was protect the genital integrity of all children, regardless of sex, culture, religion, etc. And then we proposed a number of different ways to do that legally, and the preferred method that we would want was the penal code, but other methods could be employed. Thank you.